Our intention with this panel is to polemize on the changes that the U.S. government brings to the international situation, which changes we are going through in our planet, and what's the agenda that we should propose as revolutionary socialists and as activists and militants of that country. So to begin that panel, I'm going to present Alejandro Bodart, member of the leadership of MST Argentina and coordinator of the International Socialist League.
Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas
Good
noches.
morning, good afternoon, good evening, all of you who are watching or listening, participating of this forum in different countries in which we intervene. I think that this debate is a key debate because you cannot understand what is happening and what will happen in the world if you don't understand the changes that are taking place right now. Those are qualitative changes. The world is not the same as it was a few years ago. And we'll see in the following years a series of new and different phenomena from what we have seen in the last decades. So it's very important to deepen this debate. These are recent changes. Many things are still hard to appropriately assess the scope of those changes, but we should prepare for those changes that are coming and that have a historical aspect. They are attempting to change the world order that began at the end of the Second World War, or even more, because during the 90s there was a restructuring of the world order after the Soviet Union fell. And they are leaving behind the neoliberal globalization to go towards a new kind of order. And it's not clear if they're going to be able to do so or not. That's why we ask this question. Are we going through to a new world order or to a new world disorder? It is not clear if imperialism will be able to once again take into its hands this world order. It is hard in 15 minutes to define all elements. That's why we just published a new magazine that it's been distributed in many languages, and we call that anyone who wants to study these issues can read it. And it's more elaborated on than what I'm going to say today. The United States, for a while, for a long time, is deteriorating as a dominant imperialism. And that's the reason why the U.S. is getting rid of all the old elements and try to restructure globally so that they can be an hegemony again. The United States, due to multiple reasons, has been losing the role that it played, especially before the 90s and after the 90s. In a few words, the U.S. thought and believed, and many people from the left also said the same thing, but that in the 90s, imperialism was going to strengthen, that U.S. imperialism would be stronger, a super imperialism. It was the end of history, the end of socialism. You might remember that. It was a difficult time for the left since there was skepticism all over the world. But imperialism failed on that task. What did they want during the 90s? Once the Soviet Union fell and all the quote-unquote real socialism did as well, they thought that they would be able to colonize all the states that they did not dominate. There's a whole debate about what those states were. The definition I use are the unrecognizable worker states, but they were not capitalist nations or states. Since the falling down of the Soviet Union and those states, there was capitalist restoration, and the United States and global imperialism thought that they were going to semi-colonize all those states. China, Russia, a third of humanity. One third of humanity existed in states that were not capitalist at the time. So they were winners of the Cold War since its competitor fell. But none of that happened because the states, far from being semi-colonized, they turned themselves into competitors of United States imperialism. They even turned into not only capitalist states, but also imperialist powers. The United States that thought they were going to rule the world found out that China started to become a global competitor, and there were many power poles and regional imperialisms like Russia, but Turkey as well, for example. It's not only Russia, India, and among others. So the situation got complicated for the US. And that's a really important factor to explain the deterioration that took place. And in addition, in 2008, there was a huge crisis that has to do with all of this, that already in a weakened shape, far from being able to control that crisis just deepened. And they are not able to control that crisis, not even today. So the world turned out to be much more complex for hegemonic imperialism that was still the main one, but it started to lose power. Trump, and I will be brief, Trump tries to revert that situation by getting rid of all that we know since the Second World War, to see if they are able, with another agenda and another orientation, to retake an orientation that is able to strengthen the United States. Will he be able to do so or not is yet to be seen. But that's what they're trying to do, to recover that role that they played internationally of hegemonic imperialism. The issue, and we went through a hard time during the 90s, quite a unilateral situation, but we explained the falling of the Soviet Union as a double aspect. First, Stalinism for decades, turning triumphs of the working class, like expropriation, into a disastrous, heinous apparatus. But also the falling of the Soviet Union was a hit, a blow to the United States, because they were partners. They were disputing during the Cold War, but on the other side, every time there was a revolutionary insurrection or uprising, the role of the Soviet bureaucracy ended up helping imperialism. So the falling of that bureaucracy already complicated the U.S. imperialism existence, because U.S. imperialism had to deal with contradictions by itself, not having any partner in crime. You can imagine a country without union bureaucracy. Just imagine that. The bourgeoisie won't be the same thing, because they need or they use union bureaucracies to control workers. So the Soviet Union played that role internationally. So the falling of Stalinism as an international apparatus did weaken the winner of the Cold War. So those contradictions take the United States to this situation. Trump came to change everything that exists. He says we cannot keep on working this way. He obviously speaks to the ruling class. These measures that are seen as crazy do actually have legit support of the United States bourgeoisie with their endorsement, because they either end up supporting him directly or they just by a mission do so. Trump has decided to end all economic agreements built in the last 70 years, all institutions that were built the last 70 years as well. He wants to debate the borders that were set for the last 70 years. So he is willing to destroy all of that and rediscuss absolutely everything. So this is an important debate because everything that's happening has to do with the decisions of this man, who's not crazy. He's not a crazy person, as some say. Some also said that Milei was crazy. Okay, maybe he is a little bit crazy, but behind him, there's a plan, there's a scheme organized, aimed at reverting a crisis that cannot be reverted by the usual or normal methods. That's what we mean by this attempt of creating this new order. We call it disorder as well because it will depend on class struggle if they're able to do so or not. Or not, as it has been happening during the 90s when they thought they could do one thing, but they were not able to due to the issues on the ruling class, but also because of the results of class struggle. Even if they, for some time, defeated the working class, and even if there have been highs and lows of class struggle, they were not able to do as they pleased. There was a huge debate when Trump, for example, agreed with Putin about Ukraine and without Ukraine. And Oleg will talk about this, because it was the first clear blow to the previously set order. How did it work before that? Imperialism would support in this inter-imperialist dispute with emergent imperialisms. They would position themselves against Russia, trying to weaken Russia. But they never intended to actually defeat Russia, because since Russia is an imperialist power, they are more afraid of the working class. If the Russian regime fell in that region, the working class could not be controlled because there will be a development of the class struggle. But imperialism didn't also want Russia to be strong enough to have to be a world power that could dispute influence internationally. What is it that Trump tried to do by negotiating with Putin? He tried to apply a new order, which is not negotiating through traditional mechanisms, trying to solve the issues that arise, but actually go towards a new order, like the law of the jungle, in which the strong ones negotiate among each other to be able to redistribute the world. And it doesn't matter that if in the middle of it they have to get rid of Europe, who was his previous partner. It was also discussed if this step towards negotiating with Putin actually opened the possibility of a negotiation with China and for stronger imperialism to reach agreements to rediscuss the whole world order. This is not clear if it will be that way or not, because still there is another hypothesis saying that the agreement with Putin is trying to isolate China more so that they can attack China with all their efforts, so that the dispute that the U.S. imperialism has is not with Russia, but actually with China. This has not been decided yet. I am one of the people who think that this is not clear yet for U.S. imperialism. And this tariff issue that actually shocked the world, there was a setback related to that with many countries, not with China, but with many others. how the sector of imperialism around Trump, how does it now see this possibility of the world situation being rearranged? So if you want to negotiate tariffs, then you should sit with me and then we can negotiate. So I will sit down with Putin as well to negotiate. That's Trump's perspective. Rare minerals and metals, negotiating with Ukraine for the division of that region. So there's this permanent negotiation. For example, setting up tariffs and then negotiating for them to be lifted or to be lower. With China, it was a 200% tariff, trying to force a negotiation so that if China asks them to stop advancing. But that's not clear yet, because there's an issue in the middle of that. The 2008 crisis is a super production crisis. The world produces more than what companies can turn into clear profits. So capitalism creates more poor people. So in the world, there's more people that have less capacity of acquiring goods, and it has a higher capacity of production of goods. So you may not have drinkable water, but however, there's a huge capacity of producing water pipelines. So you can produce more fridges than what are needed in the world, but there's a lot of people who don't have any. So that's the crisis of capitalism. This crisis of overproduction has generated in the world parts of the bourgeoisie that do not find profitability in production, so they turn into speculation. And that's how we got the 2008 crisis, very similar to that of the 30s, 20s. And those huge crises, the only way out imperialism has to solve them is the destruction of the productive forces so that the cycle can begin again, like a world war, and to be able to overcome that overproduction crisis. But what's the issue today? That dominant imperialism is too weak to turn to that way out, and China, who is his competitor, still is not strong enough to take a risk. And a third element that I find very important, a world war today wouldn't be a war like the First or the Second World War with the military powers and atomic powers. We wouldn't know how it can end. And the bourgeoisie actually lives on Earth. So that's one of the limits. Maybe if this crisis happened before nuclear development, we would be going through a world war so that they can redistribute the world, but and get out of the crisis. But we are not in that situation. So they have this contradiction in which they bet for a gradual way out, to create such a level of overproduction that can deal with the crisis partially, with the resistance of the working class. That's one of their main issues. Since 2008, they haven't been able to reach the overexploitation levels in order to reach the capacity of profitability that they need. They cannot find a way out of the crisis with the traditional tools that they count with. And that's when we see this permanent and continuous offensives. Democracy, as it exists, democracy, in order to apply the levels of austerity that they need, democracy is of no use for them. But we were the bourgeoisie, they also had They always use democracy as a bribe, and if not, they repressed. They had repressed colonies, but since the Second World War until now, they have not used that tool that much in big cities, but they are now willing to go towards repressive regimes, and they are willing to do so in main powers. For example, the United States. If you go there, what they're doing with migrants, with Palestinian activists, with journalists, it is a regime that is going through a process of change towards an authoritarian regime, like in Argentina or in Europe. That's being discussed as well. The democracy topic is really complex because at the same time, U.S. imperialism, in order to confront Stalinist regimes or the Soviet Union or Russia or China afterwards, ideologically, they said they were the democratic alternative. The United States is getting rid of that democracy concept, and that makes us think that we're going to have to face more repression. But they have also an issue with that, since they cannot use democracy in order to co-opt a part of society with that. And they show the real face, this sector of imperialism that used to say that they were the supporters of democracy. It can, with time, open the possibility of, in the consciousness levels, process of advancement, that they can reach conclusions that in which they see that there are no imperialists that defend democracy, and the only ones that defend democracies have to be us. And it will be more and more clear that the only ones that have a democratic agenda is the left. And this is an issue because imperialism did get stronger with the slogan of democracy, and it allowed for a while to curb on the growing of the revolutionary left. Today, without that slogan, we'll see how it turns out. But there's also the debate of Ukraine. They do not care about keeping up or respecting the borders as well. For Palestine, for example, Netanyahu and Trump making a video or in interviews saying that they wanted to displace and kick out all Palestinians, things that could not be said a few years ago, presenting their final solution to the Palestinian cause. If they get stronger, they are also coming for Canada. Overall, because they want to impose this law of the jungle dynamic. And if the United States, in order to recover from that crisis, needs to go against Canada, they are going to do so. We are going towards a world with many, many conflicts, and I think that's really important. I will say 3 more things and end, since I have no more time. This debate about fascism, there's people who think that we live in a fascist regime, and there are others that say that this was the same as before. I think the two of them are wrong. There are people who talk about fascism as well in order to lead to a mistaken political orientation, lesser evilism, like the German comrade mentioned. It has different names in different countries. In Europe, is uniting with social democracy, and the turning to the right is not only the growing of far-right expressions, but actually that in order to confront this, those who call themselves democratic do turn into the right as well, since they know that they have to go through more authoritarian measures. They apply the same measures when they are the ones who govern, and the people already made that experience. This happens in Europe as well. So in order to talk about fascism, I think that the best definition today there's no installed fascism as a strong regime, not in the United States or in Europe. But beware, governments do have fascist elements. Trump is fascist. Thing is he strong enough to apply a fascist regime in the United States? That depends on class struggle. The AFD, well, of course, they're getting stronger, the fascist elements, but it will depend on the working class struggle if they're able to set a fascist regime or not in Germany. I think that Milei here is a fascist, one of his deputies as well. But it will depend on class struggle if he's able to install a fascist regime or not. So it's not clear if fascism will triumph or not. And to those who say there's fascism, let's go build a popular front, we say no. The struggle is ongoing. We have to organize, mobilize, because we can defeat fascism only on the streets, but also, of course, building a political alternative to do so. The far right and fascism have grown because of the deteriorating of reformism and who opened the door to the right. The first action of the peoples were leaning to the left with the disasters of capitalism, Syriza, Podemos, here in Latin America, Bolivarianism, and that reformists, they showed that they cannot answer to this huge global crisis, and they ended up opening the door, disappointed the whole vanguard, opening the door to these far-right expressions. What we revolutionaries have to do in this world, which is not clear where is it going yet, is more than ever strengthening mobilization and protests and organizing with those who want to defeat fascism, but who want to build a political and revolutionary alternative. And if that does not happen, if there's no revolutionary alternative, then fascism may win. This socialism or barbarism is not just an abstract slogan. It's not that at all. There can be barbarism. There can be fascism again after the already made experiences. How can we explain what's happening with the Palestinian people if not barbarism? They tell us there are sectors that say that we cannot call that fascism. Look, Gaza, the Gaza Strip is an open roof prison, like a ghetto. But the difference is that they are being bombed. They cannot go anywhere. And Zionism is getting all the Israeli population to support those bombings and genocide, and even internationally, so that they support the genocide. And they are also getting international media to support the genocide. Fascism is a reality that has not yet been consolidated, but we have to fight so that that does not happen. And politically, we are convinced that in the world that we live in, there is no time for an evolutionary growing of our political forces. There's no time. We have to do that, but we need to regroup revolutionaries that understand which moment we are going through. There is no time for sectorism, no time for childish behaviors that are willing to join internationally in order to politically confront this vacuum alternative revolutionary currents. This is a task internationally that is more urgent than ever, and nationally as well. I just arrived from the United States. You heard some of the comrades on the forum. They are fighting to rebuild a revolutionary party, regrouping revolutionaries of the United States. And globally, internationally, our policy from the ASL is and is proven to be right, because we are being able to speak with those comrades. We comrades from Italy, from Germany, So it's not just knocking the doors of reformists and telling them we should all join each other like the Popular Front in France. The political orientation that revolutionaries need to have, knowing that doing something like that could strengthen fascism since they won't answer to the needs of the mass movement, we should go and look out for more revolutionaries of the world that are willing to take upon the task of this era, to build a new revolutionary international. It is more urgent than ever. There's a vanguard that in front of fascism radicalizes in the world. In the United States, there's a huge vanguard of young people that do not buy on the lies of Donald Trump and that are willing to put their lives and security and professional careers at risk. It is a vanguard that looks towards the left. The issue is if the left gives them an organizational and political answer. That happens in Asia, in Africa, in the United States. We have to be champions at organizing those revolutionaries with a program. It is the task of our times. Those who don't understand that and fall on dogmatism, sectarism, they do not understand the task we are waging in. It is really important. So this forum has to prove to be useful to strengthen that political orientation that we have to fight for in the mass movement among workers, among popular sectors. That's the only political orientation that can take us to be strong enough to politically defeat fascism and towards the only possible perspective for humanity, not to end in the absolute catastrophe that's fascism or a new world war or new regional wars. It is the building of a tool that can lead us to socialism. Next panelist, we give floor to Comrade Oleg Vernyk, leadership of the Revolutionary Socialist Ukrainian League. Greetings to all of you, comrades. Good afternoon. It is a great honor for me to be here today. I would like to warmly greet all of you as all Ukrainian unions who are socialists require me to. I think that this forum is a great step towards progress of our alliance, and thanks to this, we are able to debate our ideas and take them to action. It is evident that this modern phase of capitalism has reached its worst crisis, as Alejandro mentioned, or one of its worst crises. In the framework of this crisis, we see a lot of contradictions among imperialist states, and the world order that used to exist is coming to an end. And the oppressed peoples are once again targets and victims of these negotiations behind their backs by imperialist powers. But we Marxists, for us, it makes no sense to cry or to have illusions on that they're going to recover. We don't have to mourn the end of that world order that we were used to. That world order was not ideal, it was not just, and was actually based on capitalist principles. Правил совокупный западный империализм, так называемая ось добра, Western imperialism, or the axis of good, were covering up covering itself up with these slogans of defense of human rights, while they were pursuing their own interests. There was never a free market. That's a huge lie. There was always protectionism. There was always tariffs that were regulating the international market. And as it was mentioned before by Alejandro, we'll see during this year, 2025, will be characterized by a qualitative leap towards the decline of institutions. And that leads us to repressive and authoritarian trends. We will have more dictatorial governments in the future. So there's a key chapter of this global transformation, which is the alliance between two imperialisms among the United States and Russia. That pact that they signed behind the backs of Ukrainian people. That event has a key aspect. It is not only a destructive factor that comes to destroy the international law institutions, but also their attempt is to destroy all the myths saying that we were living in a just and a fair social system. The ISL analyzes correctly the situation and opens up questions that we should make each other, and is assessing which are the perspectives or where we are going towards regarding the present situation. And in this situation, the Marxist perspective is a solution, and the Marxist analysis is needed so that we can understand better what's going on in the world right now.
Только классовый анализ позволяет вскрыть истинную природу подобных межимпериалистических сделок.
Only a Marxist analysis can help us understand what these agreements between imperialists mean and how we can fight against those trends. This alliance of two imperialisms, Trump's and Putin's, is not a temporary phenomenon. It is a change on the orientation. It is a strategic change that came to stay. It won't disappear soon. In the framework of this new model for global government, we see that imperialism is acquiring new shapes, more similar to a predator. These negotiations and agreements between Trump and Putin, those negotiations without the participation of Ukraine, were a signal, were a slap on the face of the Ukrainian people and for the whole international law order.
В медиапространстве Украины усилились параллели
с mass media, they started
1938 года.
To make parallel comparisons with the Munich agreements. That was a pact in which different imperialist forces decided the fate of a small nation as a chess republic, and they decided to divide it into different parts. Ukraine is now playing the same role as that land did, and Ukraine was a victim of this game they're playing between two imperialisms.
In this
situation, Ukraine was Ukraine is not strong enough to do anything. It is really weakened. It plays the role of that former Czechoslovakia. And I want to remind everyone who is participating on this forum, right now, the military apparatus of Russia has occupied around 1/5 of the whole Ukrainian territory.
В этой слабой позиции президент Украины Владимир Зеленский,
this weak position, Ukrainian president has tried to offer Trump
украинских редкоземельных
a new
минералов.
project, a new agreement, so that the United States can administer and allocate natural resources of Ukraine in exchange of support. The Ukrainian President Zelensky was hopeful that Donald Trump could be fond of that idea and keep supplying Ukraine with weapons. But it was a trap.
Потому что Трамп воспользовался этим предложением, но не в плане продолжения американских поставок вооружений в Украину, а в плане возврата Украиной денег за уже ранее поставленное оружие.
That pact now means the cancellation of the debt that Ukraine had with the United States due to financial aid and the weapons that were given to it. 2 days ago, there were signed a new pact between the United States and Ukraine was signed. The thing is that the text of that pact, of that agreement, has to be ratified by the Ukrainian parliament, but they have not received it yet, not the complete text.
Таким образом, мы видим вполне четкие очертания совместного плана Путина-Трампа. Это раздел Украины между российским и американским империализмами.
This was Putin and Trump's plan to divide Ukraine between the two imperialisms, in which there are regions of occupation for the United States, and then they will apply a monopoly over their natural resources. But we should mention and not forget that Ukraine resources are property of the Ukraine people and no one else. The Ukrainian government is now trying to promote these ideas of this agreement being positive for Ukraine. And there is a media propaganda in Ukraine to promote that agreement and to justify the signing of this agreement among the government of the United States and Ukraine. However,
Украина становится объектом неоколониального управления.
We can see that Ukraine is turning into an object of neocolonialism.
А монопольный доступ США к стратегическим ресурсам и в первую очередь к редкоземельным.
And the monopoly over natural resources of Ukraine by the United States, it is a way of distorting that, being promoted by Donald Trump. That scandal between Trump and Zelensky, the 28th of February this year, showed the whole world that Trump is not concerned by the issues that security warranties imply for Ukrainian people. However, Trump is actually interested in monopolizing the natural resources of Ukraine, which are quite rich.
We
are all really tired of talking about the tariff and trade war that Donald Trump has declared to all nations of the world. However, the worst part was that for Russian imperialism and for Belarus, that works as a satellite of the Russian Federation, Trump did not apply any tariffs. That's something really important. There was no change regarding tariffs for Russia or Belarus. It is evident that Trump is hopeful that all of these unprecedented steps will be positively seen by Putin. And what they're betting on is that Russia, thanks to these events, can break their ties with China. We have to publicly announce that Donald Trump is acting as an ambassador of the expressions of the far right. Trump's presidency shows that he has an anti-internationalist orientation. The fact that they support fascist ideas like the AfD in Germany, or in the fascist expressions in Italy, or Alexander Lukashenko, and also the government of Hungary. And it's not a coincidence. It is part of a plan of a restoration of the restructuring of the world order, in which all working people and union movements and all basic human rights will be completely and absolutely eliminated. Those are the ideas of fascism. That mask of liberalism that Trump used to wear has fallen completely. He doesn't need to mask his ideas, his fascist ideas anymore. The liberal bourgeoisie, even if it's not completely defeated, is weakened by far-right forces. And that is a hard blow, and it will be difficult for them to recover from it. Protests that have taken place against Trump in the United States have to be done also by reformists like Bernie Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez as well. At the same time, other liberal sectors and bourgeois sectors are in a kind of a knockout, complete knockout. And many of them don't understand what's happening. What I want to say is that the working class of Ukraine, especially Western and South Ukraine has read that agreement as a threat, as a direct threat to their lives, to their working positions, and towards their human rights as well. The union activists of Ukraine have stated that these kind of agreements, quote-unquote agreements, are a threat not only for the existence of Ukraine, but also it is a clear threat towards human rights of all working class in our country. the activists, unions, and all working people and all leaderships of these unions say that the only answer to this treason and against this agreement, that the only answer is the complete solidarity of those who represent the working class in our country. It is really important also to highlight that there's military resistance, there's social resistance, and that has defeated also many illusions that the working class of Ukraine had regarding imperialism and their support. And the huge disappointment is the faith that Ukrainian workers had, this idea that that Western forces were an invincible force, an organism that couldn't be dealt with, that could not disintegrate. The Ukrainian people was able to see with their own eyes that United States imperialism or European imperialism could be a security warrant or our allies in this world.
Они всячески используют Украину как арену для выяснения собственных империалистических противоречий.
Western imperialism uses Ukraine all the time as a resource to spread propaganda and in order to justify all kind of depredative measures that they apply in their own countries and others as well. At the same time, it is presented to us, and it is evident that all those attempts of Donald Trump of restructuring subordination and the world order, that also accelerates the crisis that his own government will have. We see a huge chaotic situation due to Trump's government and his lack of capacity to govern and the key role that it plays regarding the restructuring of the world order. In this situation, socialists, revolutionary socialists, need to take a stand. And that must be clear and strong. We oppose choosing between two imperialisms. We reaffirm that only revolutionary international movement will be able to stop this process of disorder internationally, of the end of the world order as we know it. Support towards Ukrainian people is not flirting with Western nations, but it's actually a struggle, an expression of class struggle and support towards nations that fight for their self-determination. The struggle for democracy and self-determination of peoples can only be dealt with a revolutionary orientation. In this situation, revolutionary socialists are destined to be a political vanguard, to be the champions of the struggle to reestablish human rights and the rights of every nation that fights for self-determination. The struggle for democracy is a really important part of our struggle against capitalism that acts against the workers of our country.
Завершаю свое выступление некоторыми лозунгами текущего момента, которые я считаю являются
to end my report, I would like to say a few words that I think are key and that have to do with our demands and what we should install as a revolutionary international movement. Instead of having illusions and faith in international institutions, we have to bet on the support of the masses, of the support of the working class. Instead of subordinating to imperialist structures, we will spread even more and even more than before the ideas of class struggle in which the working class should be the ruling class. We say no to inter-imperialist agreements behind the backs of the Ukrainian people. We say no to far-right expressions like Putin and Trump. And we say yes to the resistance of the Ukrainian people, and we say yes to the right of the Ukrainian people to exist and to their right of self-determination. We say yes to international revolutionary movements. And we say yes to solidarity among those who represent the working class all over the world. Only in that way we would be able to restore and to have freedom in our societies, and only in that way can socialism triumph. Thank you so much, comrades. Finish this first stage of debate of this panel. We want to present Imran Kamyana from the Struggle, Pakistan.
Comrade Chair, please let me know if my voice is all right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me as a speaker at this very important forum. And most of what Comrade Alejandro and Comrade Oleg has said, I agree with it. We as an organization and a part and section of ISL agree with it. Since time is limited, so I would try that I just explain or highlight the gist or the essence of this whole situation that is still unfolding in front of us. And as Comrade Alejandro has said, that there are a lot of things that will be unfolding in the days to come. So a lot of matters are far from being decided. So first of all, we must look at this whole situation or the possibilities of the days to come in a historical manner. And we believe that Marxism is the only ideology or philosophy or method that gives a historical context to the things. Any other method, whether it be postmodernism or any other branch of bourgeois political or social science, is unable to put things into perspective in a historical manner. So all the bourgeois ideology ultimately reduce things to ahistorical picture or picture of the situation. They ultimately lead to subjectivism or the objectivism. They cannot explain this process of history, the driving factor or the driving factors that push history forward. So in that context, it is only Marxism that can explain the driving forces of history, the contradictions that take societies forward, and how these things, starting from the mode of production and economics, ultimately express themselves into the political situation and the big historical figures, whether they be revolutionaries or counter-revolutionaries. So what we are seeing right now is basically the historical organic crisis of capitalism expressing itself politically, socially, culturally, and ultimately in the figures like Donald Trump, Millet, Imran Khan, Modi in India, and many other far-right tendencies and figures all over the world. So what exactly is this crisis? This is ultimately the same contradiction or contradictions that were highlighted by Marx 150 years or so ago. That's the crisis of profitability. There is a tendency in the long run in this system that its profits ultimately fall as the composition, the share of the constant capital in the production rises, and more technologies and machineries. And in the recent years, we are seeing this rise of artificial intelligence. So all those things which they introduce into the production process to raise the profits, in the long run, they ultimately suppress the rate of profit of the system. And we have been seeing this like in more and more severe or clear forms since 1930s. That's what happened in 1930s, that the same thing which ultimately led to the Second World War and ultimately like revived capitalism for a few decades. But then we once again see this same problem in 1970s and 80s. And basically the neoliberalism was a massive, a gigantic process to revive the rate of profit of capitalism through an onslaught on the working masses all over the world, through privatization, through austerity, through limiting, through union busting, and through other means in which they basically try to shift more and more wealth from the working classes to the ruling classes, and to try to reduce the share of the common masses in the overall pool of the wealth that is generated under capitalism. So the same, but the neoliberalism or the neoliberal restructuring couldn't give a lease of life to capitalism for a very long time. So we once again the system went into crisis in 2008, and since then it has not been able to revive itself. And there is all the things that were once pushing this system forward or lifting it upwards, they have turned into their opposites. We are witnessing record level of debts. The growth is suppressed all over the world. There is this long depression or long recession, which we are witnessing all over the world. And because of all these in this scenario, we see that the growth, particularly in the advanced forms of capitalism, in the Western capitalism, the growth is suppressed. In many economies, many major economies are either stagnant or they are falling in terms of GDP growth or per capita GDP growth. Same is the case with investment. its growth rate is falling. So because of this, we are unable, capitalism is unable to generate the employment at a rate that is required. Standard of living of the people all over the world is falling. So this is basically the economic aspect of this whole crisis, and all the post Second World War politics that was basically erected on these economic bases. Since this economic base is eroding, the economic base of this liberal capitalism is eroding, and it is in crisis. This whole economic base is like shaking. So the whole political structure is shaking as well. It is in decay. It is in crisis. Just like this is a situation, just like what happens in an earthquake. So all the, as Comrade Alejandro said, all the existing or traditional parties, whether they be on the right or whether they be on the left, particularly in all those countries where there used to be a two-party system, a so-called center-left party and so-called a center-right party, this whole traditional politics is in decay and crisis. And because everything, whether it be cultural or political, this whole existing status quo or this whole existing this bourgeois society with all its aspects is basically we find it in a melting pot, and new formations are emerging. And we have witnessed these new formations, particularly in the forms of mass revolutionary movements and rebellions since 2011. And which start from Egypt and Tunisia to this day. We have seen it in Kenya, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh. So, excuse me. So this whole, we see this whole discontent in the forms of these mass movements. But the problem is that the formations which arised out of these movements, the so-called new left, couldn't present a revolutionary way out of the revolutionary crisis, whether it be Syriza or whether it be Podemos or whether it be Bernie Sanders. And there can be many other examples of this so-called new left, whether it be the movements in Latin America, in the form of Evo Morales or this Bolivarian revolution. They were unable to present or pave a revolutionary way forward for the working masses. They were unable to present a program of overthrowing the revolution. So they were basically confined within this the limits of capitalism, which ultimately led to the retreats of all these movements because of the lack of the subjective factor and the crisis of the leadership. These movements ultimately went into retreat, or they failed, leading to the situations what we see in Egypt in the form of a draconian dictatorship, or civil war in Syria, or in other forms of the failure. So all this situation has ultimately led to this rise of far right during the last many years. The epitome of which is this, or the personification of which is Donald Trump, because he is ruling the biggest and most powerful empire in the history of humankind. So this is basically the rise of lumpen bourgeoisie, which I believe that's a right expression. And these are, whether it be like Millet or Trump or AFD or Giorgia Meloni or Modi or Mary Le Pen, they are not traditional right wing. They are tendencies like this is a new right, a far right or hard right, and in most cases they represent a lumpen bourgeoisie with fascist and authoritarian tendencies, and they are unable to comprehend the long-term interests and plannings and the strategic aspects of running this system. And they are very short-sighted, they are very narrow-minded, and this is ultimately the crisis of a bourgeois leadership, which is basically the expression of the crisis of the system itself. And what their intentions are, like, they basically want to solve the crisis of capitalism, not in a progressive manner, but in a very regressive and in a very authoritarian and in a very reactionary manner. That's what they are doing. What Millet is doing, or what Trump wants to do in US. They basically want to resolve the crisis of capitalism. And this whole situation represents the total meltdown or dysfunction of this liberal order, which was established after 1945, after the Second World War. But the point is, they are not replacing this liberal imperialist order with something progressive or something better, but with something far worse. And as Comrade Oleg has also highlighted. So this is a complete recipe for more chaos, for more bloodshed, for more repression, for more union busting, for more attacks and onslaughts on the working masses all over the world. What Trump is basically doing is a very short-sighted person. So once again, it's a crisis of system, which is reflecting in these people. That Trotsky once said that the British imperialism, or for that matter, the Western imperialism, in its youth, while it was rising, these imperialists were able to foresee the future like 100 years in advance. And now we see that the Trump changes his decisions within the matter of minutes, within the matter of hours. Like, whole thing is being run on personal impulses and on the basis of his how he's feeling, what his mood is. But still, there is a method in this madness. These people are mad. They are reactionary. They are like bullies. But still, there is some method in what they are doing. What they want is like more cushion for profits for their class, and particularly their clique. This is another aspect of this whole thing. They are corrupt as compared to the traditional or classical bourgeois leaderships, which were trained and which were propped up in the during like many decades, and they were relatively, at least in a hypocritical manner, they were like decent people, they were cultured people. But these people are corrupt, and they basically the interests of their clique or their gang comes first before the interest of the whole system. So whether he is imposing tariffs or he is going for the privatization or for the austerity, the ultimate aim for Trump particular, and other people like him, particularly Modi in India, or maybe Putin in Russia, it's a similar case, if not the same. The ultimate aim for them is to increase their wealth as much as possible. And that's what they are doing. What Trump wants is basically to turn the U.S. state in a personal property, in a corporation. They are basically trying to run and turn the U.S. Government and U.S. state into a private corporation. And anything that is spent on the masses in the form of welfare or any other facilities that working class enjoys, like it's a matter of loss for them. That's what Dodge is all about. So they are basically trying to dismantle the whole welfare mechanism, whatever of it is left after 1980s. Even they are trying to even dismantle that whole thing. They are basically trying to dismantle the U.S. Social Security. Tariffs are for him basically a tax through which they would try to cut the tax on the wealthy, particularly his own clique, particularly his own gang, and the people in the form of tariffs, common people in the forms of tariff, they would be paying these taxes, and they would try to utilize these taxes to reduce the burden of taxation on the ruling classes, particularly his gang of bullies. So then again, it is not clear what his intentions are towards China. But before that, I would like to once again highlight this very important factor. All these racial or religious prejudices or tensions, these ethnic tensions, and these reactionary narratives about the immigrants or the black people or the people that are not white, and all these religious bigotry and conservatism is part and parcel of this whole project that this far right is carrying. So they cannot just say that, okay, we want to resolve the crisis of capitalism by crushing the working masses, as no fascist or no far right figure has ever said. So they basically want to gain the social basis. They stir up all this hatred and all these prejudices, and they fan the flames of all these reactionary conflicts and contradictions within the society. So what his intentions are towards China or Russia, it's still not clear. But in my opinion, these people, particularly the Putin gang in Russia or the Trump, and they have very close cultural and political, but also economic relations. Their business interests are common, and it may not be on the surface, but underground they may be having very close economic and business ties with one another. So what does he want to do with China? Does he really want to restore the hegemony of US imperialism and want to crush or at least defeat China for the time being? Does he believe that he can, or Russian or American imperialism can do it? It is still not clear. It is quite possible that he is basically trying to struck a deal with China, because he says he looks at everything as a deal, as a real estate developer, a corrupt real estate crony or magnate or developer would do. So that's why he imposes tariffs one day and then takes his decision back the other day. But still, even if he is able to struck a deal with China, and he ditches his European friends and allies, it won't lead to a more stable world, but it would lead to a more unstable world. It would lead to more disorder in the world. And this, as I said earlier, this system, as Comrade Oleg has said, that this system was not a just world order, it was an exploitative imperialist world order. But once again, the way he's trying to struck deal with all these people around the world, particularly by supporting the far right tendencies all over the world and the authoritarian regimes all over the world. This is a very interesting thing. His relations, at least so far, his relations with the Pakistani state, which is a very authoritarian state. Basically, it's a dysfunctional democracy. It's a dictatorship, military dictatorship. But his relation with the Pakistani state so far are very, very warm, very friendly. And same is the case with many other countries and many other far right parties and trends and currents all over the world. So a lot of things would unfold in the days to come. But still, the Chinese are, in my opinion, in a far better position, in a far strong or solid position as compared to US. This is a whole debate, and this is a whole other topic which we don't have time to go into detail for the time being. But because of this very strong state capitalist model with a lot of state intervention and ownership and planning in the economy, the Chinese have been planning for this for decades. Even after 1978, they were planning for it, and they didn't totally liberalized their economy, but they kept it under this Stalinist bureaucratic control. But in any case, this interim, the fall or decay or the crisis of a hegemonic imperialist power and the rise of new regional or regional imperialist powers who want to become a hegemonic imperialist powers on on the global stage, this is a complete recipe for more conflicts, for more contradictions, and we are already witnessing it in Ukraine, in Gaza, and in Yemen, in many other parts of the world. And these are like, this whole world is this full of these landmines. Like, you step onto it and you don't know like where the next mine is going to explode. So the problem is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the onslaught of neoliberalism and union busting, the working class to some extent has gone in a state of atomization, particularly in the West. But still, we are living in a time in history when the proportion of proletariat in the global population is biggest and unprecedented in history. In China, while there has been atomization or like disintegration of of working class unions and organizations in West, we see the rise of this proletariat of like 700-800 million in China, and then there is Pakistan, then there is India, then there are other countries. The problem is that this the ideology of lesser evilism cannot stop this rise of far right, and we must be very clear. Like, wherever these people would be able to take hold, whether it be Trump in US or whether it be like Orban in Hungary or Modi in India or other similar figures, wherever they would rise and they are able to take hold of the state, they are going nowhere. There won't be any transparent elections, or maybe there won't be any elections at all. And Trump is basically like preparing himself as a king, as a monarch. He's even presenting him in that manner. So it's a very, very serious situation, and the humanity is finding itself into. So in that situation, that ideology of lesser evilism cannot like defeat this reactionary onslaught of the and rise of the far right. To form up an alliance with these so-called center left or the liberal bourgeoisie would be a crime, because this is because of them that the conditions have emerged in which the far right has risen. So we cannot put out the fire with the fuel. So in that scenario, we'll have to organize the working masses. It is only the working class that through a revolutionary upsurge, that through its rebellious movements, that through its revolutionary organizations, and in the final analysis, through a revolutionary Bolshevik Marxist leadership, can rise and stop this whole process, which would ultimately lead to authoritarian regimes, maybe far worse than that we have witnessed prior to the Second World War. This is just the beginning of this whole process. This whole thing is unfolding, and what horrors these people, these far right, or these whether we call it fascist or not, whether we call them fascist or not, this is, in my opinion, is something secondary. But they are not much different to what the pre-Second World War fascism was. But they have these new forms, they have these new tools, particularly the social media, the corporate media, which was not present prior to the Second World War. And they have this immense wealth, which was not available to such tendencies even before the Second World War. Like, this lumpen bourgeoisie is relying on trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth from their backers or their supporters within the ruling classes. So to sum up, we must continue this discussion, but a few points that I would highlight once again, that Trump is would not abandon power without any significant resistance. It can be from from the working class of US, and also the same would happen against all these far right tendencies in all over the world. This is a complete recipe of an intensification of class struggle. There would be resistance, there would be protests, there would be strikes, there would be new formations that would emerge out of this whole process of intensification of class struggle. Or there can be a possibility, even which may be minute at this point, that they can be, particularly in the case of US, that they can be killed or crushed by a faction within the US state, or a faction within the bourgeoisie. But that is another question. What happens in the days to come, and how what steps Trump takes. But in the long run, these people are, through these tariffs and through this national capitalism and protectionism, they are basically going to further worsen or intensify the crisis of capitalism. The crisis of capitalism cannot be resolved within the confines of the system of capitalism, as Marx had pointed out 150 or so years ago. So we must be prepared for what is to come. We are living in extraordinary times. It's a privilege, but also, like, it poses a lot of questions regarding our role in history as Marxist, as revolutionary socialist. The world would not be same ever again. Extraordinary events lie ahead, including wars, civil wars, but also the class struggles, the revolutions, the rebellions, the popular movements all over the world. We must, as national organizations, but more than that, as an international organization, we must get prepared for those extraordinary events, or for those storms, for those basically the thunderstorms that lie ahead, and we must forge a revolutionary international party to resolve this crisis of the leadership of the working classes. Only through the overthrow of this imperialist capitalist system can humanity be taken, be led towards emancipation, and only through that, through these means, can we save humanity from a total destruction to from a total annihilation. So the ideas of Marx and Engels and Lenin and Trotsky are relevant today than they were even a few decades ago. They are relevant more than ever. Marxism is still alive, and the need to build a revolutionary party on Marxist lines and overthrow the system is more now than ever before in the history. Thank you.
Gracias. Gracias, Imran. Desde Pakistán.
Thank you, Imran, from Pakistan. I think that there was a question regarding the worker states and what was their difference with capitalist states. There's a debate on the left about what they were, actually. Some comrades talk about them turning into capitalist states long before the Soviet Union fell. State capitalism. It is a debate. We recently made a seminar here in Argentina with some comrades for multiple books that you can also look at today. There are comrades who believe that during the 30s, they stopped being worker state because of the counter-revolution of Stalinism. And there are other comrades that believe that it was really difficult to acknowledge them as worker states, but they were still not capitalist. There was not a complete restoration of capitalism. That's an ongoing debate. I think we can keep on deepening that debate. In the ASL, there are different opinions regarding that, different positions. Since we come from different traditions, then we have different elaborations on that. What we agree on is that today they have turned into capitalist states, and some of them have advanced even in becoming imperialist nations, like China, global imperialisms, global capitalists, but also as regional imperialisms, not as much as Russia, who is not only a regional imperialism but exceeded its region, unlike China. Why is this important? Because in Trotskyism, there is a specific debate about this that determines the political orientation that we adopt. I think that the most important one, that the present debate is more important than the previous debate. The comrades from Partido Obrero, for example, and their Turkish partners believe that in Russia there is still no full restoration of capitalism, so they defend their actions and they're functional to what we think is an imperialist country. It's actually the second world power that is attacking a semi-colonial country. So it is a key debate today, or the debate with the Trotskyist fraction regarding the same topic. They have even said that in a war between China and the United States, they have stated that they would support China. And that is also translated to why they have had a political orientation that is completely incorrect regarding Ukrainian, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and which has made them turn their backs to the self-determination rights and making them take a functional stand for these imperialist powers, and saying that revolutionary defeatness should be the political orientation that they should adopt. I think that's the most important debate that we need to carry forward, because it has to do with what we do today. The other question has to do with a historical debate. And in the ISL, for example, we have joined programmatically to defend the right of the Ukrainian people for their self-determination. And then we keep on advancing on the definition of what's China, what's Russia, that they have turned into capitalist states and that have advanced on turning into imperialist powers, be it regional or exceeding its regional borders. So I won't say anything else about that. But for the next question, it is explained by the decline of the United States imperialism. So then you have regional powers that tend to group due to the loss of the hegemony of United States imperialism. So the United States wants to get rid of NATO, wants to get rid of its support, military support of Europe, stop supporting international organisms that today are an obstacle for the political orientation of recovering power. So I think that it has to do with this topic of believing that during the 90s, they were going to enter a unipolar world in which they would become a super powerful imperialism. But in the end, many powers kept on developing and competing with them to boost their own policies. And there are many contradictions with imperialism as well. That's why Trump wants to change everything and see if he can recover lost influence, which I think is really difficult. And there's an international crisis due to this. This attempt of America First, which is Trump's political orientation, and of deepening the tariff measures, and of course it affects them. It might make them enter a recession due to rising expenses. So it can turn against them. Many of them talk about stagnation. And there's also a crisis with big U.S. corporations because a lot of its production stages are actually installed in China. So there's a problem with the production chain, with the chain of production, which has the strongest internal market. So they had to quickly reach a series of agreements. Technological industries have reached agreements with the tariffs that were set against China. For example, an iPhone could raise its prices threefold, fourfold, because setting up those tariffs for China, in which their products, like iPhones, are produced, would result in a rise in prices that would affect global economy, but mostly theirs. So this Trump's offensive is really complex, and it is leading to this world disorder. And now he says, as he has stated in different universities, that everyone is kissing his ass because everyone is looking for him to negotiate. But China is not doing so. They are actually doing the opposite, and we'll see what happens. So it's not clear if this tariff measure with China will benefit or not the United States. But it allows the United States to have some benefits, especially with European economies. And it deepens the semi-colonization orientation in those regions, since those negotiations for lower tariffs, of course, mean something in exchange for the United States to benefit them, like Ukraine. If you want my support, then you should give me the right to extract rare metals and minerals. But that has a limit, because semi-colonial countries might be willing to do so, but other regional powers or those that have structures to resist that offensive, like China, are not as easy to deal with. So it's leading to a crisis, economic international crisis, and the word hyperinflation and stagnation are more common every day, since the prices of goods and commodities are being affected by it. So that's the situation we are in. That's why those measures change so much. They are under a lot of different pressures. China cannot be an alternative to the far right, because the democratic values and human rights values in China are non-existent. So it cannot be an alternative in the point of view of democracy, rights, as a counterpart of the far right. That's why I explained before, there's a new world in which there's no sector of imperialism. None, one or the other, defend, at least as propaganda to reach a sector of society, certain values. There is nowadays, there's a unification, a joint position of showing themselves to the world as what they have always been. Comrades already said it, but what existed before this was not good, what was not fair, was not just. But at least they tried to hide that real face of capitalism under the mask of human capitalism. So they are showing themselves as they always were, as their true face, not as the one that defends democracy or anything else. So China cannot be an alternative. So that's why it is a huge mistake to position oneself in that field. There are political currents that call themselves progressive, neo-Stalinist currents as well, that try to show that the alternative in front of this declining imperialism is China. Behind that, I mean, to believe that is to think that the alternative to a far-right expression is a dictatorship expression, is to think that the alternative to Milei is Macri, or conservative sectors in Europe. So behind campism, they try to drag these sectors of society to that position. So as they see Trump taking a series of measures that are offensive, instead of guiding them towards revolutionary left and socialism, they wanted to trap them in this net of Chinese alternative. And beware, at the same time, China ends up supporting, and Russia as well, far-right expressions because they feel more identified with them than with any other political expression. Beyond any statement, they have done nothing against the genocide that Israel is perpetuating in the Gaza Strip. Putin is a person that permanently shares his opinions, saying that Trump is a great guy. So the far right in Europe is also divided. Some of them think that what Russia does is fine, others do not. But this disorder makes it clear that we need to oppose imperialisms in all shapes and forms. That's why there are huge debates on the left due to campism. That's why there have not been great protests supporting the right to self-determination of Ukraine, and I'm talking about the Trotskyist fraction. Even when some of them speak against campism, they do support it with their actions at the end of the day. So it's really important to explain that it's not an alternative. China is not an alternative in front of Trump or in front of the far right. None of them. We have to position ourselves over, saying that there is no progressive camp, and we have to build something else. And that takes me to the question of regroupment regarding the comrades of the Trotskyist fraction, because I think that there's something that is not understood about the moment we are going through and the need of rediscussing the tactics of building of the revolutionary left from the post-war until today. The post-war period, the absence of Trotsky, having to face the world situation with a really weak leadership, and the strengthening of Stalinism created a huge dispersion of revolutionary forces. And inside those forces, new families arose, different isms in Trotskyism. And there was a tragic period in which Stalinism was strengthened, and the Second World War did not end in the same way that the first did, and that divided our movement. The issue is that global stage with Stalinism, in which we had to take care and protect this flame of revolution, that stage changed in the world. Stalinism doesn't exist anymore. There is a world that is entering a worse and worse and deeper crisis, and if we do not take into our hands to keep on discussing and opening debates to others, but instead only take care of our own family and attack others, we will never reach the conclusion on the debate of how we strengthen a revolutionary movement with influence of masses. And it does not mean changing the program. And that's when the comrades of the Trotskyist fraction do their mental gymnastics to explain the unexplainable. The ISL program is quite advanced. We are discussing here as part of the regroupment towards our next World Congress and advancing towards a deeper program. Because when we funded the ISL, we had a really solid programmatic base, but we want to deepen that program. There are programmatic points in debate, for example, the importance of self-determination rights of peoples, or China, and what's our perspective towards that imperialism. Those are programmatic debates that are really important. But we think that the Trotskyist fraction is deeply mistaken regarding that, and it has to do with skepticism regarding the possibility of building a revolutionary leadership. We think that they do not believe that it's possible to build a revolutionary leadership at an international level that can actually have influence. And I think that that's because they do not trust their own political orientations and definitions. We want to build an international that can allow us to debate with each other, to discuss with each other. In Argentina, for example, Trotskyism has great influence, or at least more than other countries. Why cannot we advance in a joint movement and overcome this moment of only being an electoral front that we have among other Trotskyist parties? We would be able to organize dozens of thousands of comrades towards a fundamental strategy of the dispute of power, in which different tendencies would be able to jointly take action, but also debate with each other. We cannot convince the majority of taking part of a structure that doesn't work that way democratically, but we can convince the majority to act in a democratic structure in which they can develop and elaborate on their own political ideas. Bolshevism in Russia, it was the unity of small Marxist groups that existed, separated from each other, that joined, and Trotsky actually joined at the end of that process. And as many historians say today, there's more agreement among Trotskyist organizations that are apart from each other than the agreements that different sections had inside the Bolshevik Party. They had differences that were publicly stated. So the problem is not programmatic differences, because we could have differences inside our program, as the own Bolshevik Party allowed, as well as the Third International allowed as well, or the First International allowed as well. But the issue is, if we really think that the task that we have today is to regroup revolutionaries around a common program and a method that is not self-proclaiming oneself or being able to control everything and everyone. Our method today to answer to this urgent task, because fascism is in our future if we do not answer to that task. The Popular Front will keep on taking the vanguard towards new demoralization and disappointment, as it will for sure arise in Argentina in front of the no political orientation, in front of the mass movements. It will take advantage of that to create those kind of movements. So our task as revolutionaries is to make our greatest efforts towards regroupment of revolutionaries, but behind, of course, of a common program, but as well of a method that is opposed to dogmatism, opposed to this idea of having full agreement to be able to join each other. That's opposed to the methods of those who believe that we still live in the post-Second World War period. The only way out is to regroup with different revolutionary organizations that come from different traditions and that can build a joint organization for this new stage. That's the process that we started with the ISL. And I will be honest with you. We thought when we started to build the ISL that this would be a really slow process. But then there were comrades and organizations that broke apart from old movements. And when we reached the conclusions that in order to lead the mass movements, we needed to join others that come from different traditions, we were able to speak to other comrades, revolutionary comrades of the world. There are many revolutionaries on the world, and many of them will not join a sectarian organizations that propose that in order to enter those organizations, they have to say yes to everything that the leadership of that party says. The only thing that will allow them to enter an organization is to based on a joint program that is elaborated among each other, coexisting with those different traditions, to build a new tradition different from what we come from. That's the only way to answer to this urgent task. That's our project with the ISL. It is not a closed project. We would like to agree with other organizations to discuss our program. It is not just an arbitrary regroupment. It is part of our programmatic debate. It is not only to agree in an abstract way on programmatic points. It's discussing how we can build organizations that have mass influence in every of our countries. And those comrades have not reached the conclusions that that's the task of revolutionaries today. So I think that the best way of finishing that debate is asking ourselves who is going to actually grow in the world. We think that those who are going to grow are the ones that accept that other revolutionary comrades exist and that we can build a revolutionary organization if we have brotherly and democratic methods, and that all traditions have something to contribute to a new one that can actually answer to the moment we're going through. If we do not accept that, then we won't have the tools to answer to this task, and this will be paid with lives. If we don't build an organization and a leadership that is attractive for the vanguards that are going to arise around the world, sadly and unfortunately, fascism will actually advance. And I will repeat, socialism or barbarism is not an abstract phrase. If we socialists do not advance, fascism will. In order to advance, we need to build strong and attractive alternatives. It is not an abstract matter. The issue of awareness, of consciousness, solving that will allow us to be an alternative for that vanguard. A lot of people will resist and will answer to these far-right expressions. Consciousness can advance as long as an organization, a revolutionary organization exists. We believe that we have to build that organization with a healthy method and a solid program. Thank you, comrades.
Спасибо, товарищи. Тут просто только что произошла
Thank
вот
you so much,
интересная
comrades. I
ситуация.
recently
Так что был
went through a
грохот,
situation that I think it's really interesting.
взрывы
I just
какие-то,
heard
да,
a
и
huge
я думаю,
noise in my
странно,
city.
как это может быть, ведь не была воздушная тревога объявлена, а это оказалось просто
Because
гроза,
no one had
и
announced
дождь пошел. То есть это вот ловлю себя уже
that
на
there was an
трансформации сознания. Вот как мы
emergency,
воспринимаем
there was a huge
жителей
storm.
Украины, да, банальный гром,
So
банальную грозу, банальный дождь.
what I
То
want to
есть
say
уже на
with
уровне
this,
подсознания
we get
ожидаем
any strong
символа
noise
обстрела, взрывов.
makes us
Это
panic since
и
we are
смешно, и
expecting
грустно уже, на самом
bombing all the time. It is sad and it is ridiculous at the same time. I think it will be difficult and it will take us years to overcome this weird behavior that we have adopted in Ukraine due to the war. I was listening to the questions that you comrades have made, and there was a question regarding how Ukraine and the masses what they think about this agreement between Trump and Russia. Honestly, I cannot say. Well, it was not a surprise for anyone. A lot of people in Ukraine, many unionists and, well, common citizens until now and before, they were already doubtful of the intentions of our quote-unquote allies of the United States. What Trump negotiated with Putin behind Ukraine's back was not a surprise for the working class in Ukraine, but media was selling that agreement as this is ridiculous, how can this happen? But it is cynical. It led to a cynical perspective. It was something that was expected.
Мне кажется, что очень позитивные есть последствия вот этого массового восприятия украинцев.
I think there are many positive consequences of this Ukrainian people perception.
На мой взгляд, связан с тем, что люди массово поняли, что нет никаких
point is that people started to understand that there are not good and bad elements. There's no defender of democratic values on the one side and then on the other just bad people. All those imperialist representatives are the same. And now what I see is that people started to perceive this situation more rationally, without fake hopes, without running behind the expectations that the United States was our brother people or our allies. All that stupidity just faded away from the general consciousness of Ukrainian society. And regarding the second question that had to do with how is resistance going and what's the present political orientation of Zelensky, what I want to say is that in the last 2 months, the advance of Russian troops have halted substantially due to the advance of in regions of the south and east, because the Russian army does not have military or technological elements to advance substantially in that region. There are quite shy advances in which these small groups of 5 or 10 people tops are trying to penetrate the line of Ukrainian defense. That tactic has certain successes, but There are only advances of a few meters per week, and that speaks for itself. Russia is really weakened and cannot defeat Ukraine, and it won't be able to strengthen their position. The only solution for Russia to be able to win this war is to be able to mobilize more people forcefully, for them to get more soldiers in the front line. But Russia is really scared of making that decision, because that could lead towards an upsurge or mass mobilization or many protests in the whole country. So that's why Putin would rather avoid mobilization. He doesn't say anything about that to media, and is promising huge amounts of money for those willing to enlist in the Russian army. That's working, but does not lead to a lot of new soldiers in the front lines. And that's why the advance of Russian army is not having great results lately.
Проводит достаточно спорную, на мой взгляд,
Regarding Zelensky as Ukraine's president, he's taking forward a political orientation that's quite controversial from the logical point of view. What is he doing? Why is he doing that? That's what many people ask themselves.
Ряд медийных персон, накладываются санкции на его политических оппонентов.
Media sources are being sanctioned because they are property of his political opposition members.
Всех прав и прежде всего политических прав. Он не имеет права выдвигаться никуда на выборы и тому подобное.
And they are looking to ban the opposition of taking part in the next elections.
В частности, в прошлом месяце санкциям был подвергнут депутат парламента, лидер фракции Европейской солидарности, бывший
our parliament member of European Solidarity was sanctioned, Petro Poroshenko. He was sanctioned by Zelensky to take him away of his possibilities of joining or being part of the next elections.
Оппозиционный политик, который сейчас находится в США, Алексей Арестович.
And there's another member of the opposition that was also prosecuted.
Это, конечно, буржуазные политики, вот, но нам интересен сам факт.
They are politicians that represent the bourgeoisie, of course, but the fact that the possible candidates for president are sanctioned, that fact, those measures, drastic measures that he has taken, that arises a lot of anger in the Ukrainian society.
То есть это все говорит о том, что в условиях как бы внешней нестабильности, продолжения российской военной
of instability and external instability, in those conditions of treason by Western forces, Zelensky is being forced to strengthen his position his political figure towards through sanctions, executive measures, banning the opposition of the right of participating in elections through media, ban them from spreading their ideas. The second question has to do with if it's worth it or not to support the Ukrainian people's resistance. Because it might lead to a NATO strengthening. I think that in part, Comrade Alejandro already answered this in his criticism of campism. This principle of the enemy of my enemy is my ally and is my friend. But we are going to elaborate on this point by point. Let's forget that NATO is a military and political bloc, and it doesn't have the strength that it used to have. We have to admit that. In addition, new imperialism elements have arisen, and they are military and economic powers, really strong ones. New alliances arise like BRICS or others with Russia and other ex-Soviet nations. Those blocs are antagonic or are confronted with each other. But that does not make them better than NATO. NATO is not worse or better. It's just one more political bloc that exists today. Second topic. NATO is really weakened today. Inside NATO, there are two countries that pursue pro-Russian elements. There are two nations, Hungary and Slovakia. Inside NATO, there's also Turkey that puts forward its own position that have nothing to do with the rest of the members of NATO. And inside NATO, you have Trump, so you have the US, which is threatening to get out of it because they're sick of financing it and funding it. And that makes the rest of them lean towards the same decision, if they want to keep on spending on those alliances or not. American imperialism did leave Afghanistan as well. They were powerless when things had to do restructured in Cuba, in Venezuela as well. They were not able to do anything for those peoples. We don't have any idea of what's going to happen with NATO in the next 6 months or a year. We do not know that. And lastly, third my third argument and the most important one. The resistance of Ukrainian people against Russian imperialism has nothing to do with NATO, has nothing to do with strengthening NATO or not, or its political orientation. The resistance of the Ukrainian people has to do with their right, the right of any people of the world of self-determination and territorial integrity. And regarding this, precisely, we need to speak, when we speak of the resistance of the Ukrainian people, we need to speak of this right. It's the same thing with Western Sahara, same thing when we speak of the resistance of Kurdish people.
Это про демократическое право любого народа земного шара на самостоятельное развитие.
With the right of any people in this planet of developing itself as an independent nation.
Мы бесконечно долго, много и упорно говорим в Украине, да, и обращаемся к российским левым социалистическим активистам с очень простым тезисом, что борьба с украинской буржуазией.
And we also want to speak with the activists of Russia. This struggle, this class struggle, is something that has to prevail in our narrative, and we have to ally with each other among socialist parties of both countries, Ukraine and Russia. The ISL is an organization that analyzes and takes a stand and talks about the two aspects of this Russian-Ukrainian war. On the one hand, the defense of the right of the Ukrainian people for self-determination, as I mentioned, and its struggle against Russian imperialism. And on the other hand,
борьба на территории Украины российского и западного империализма.
And that the confrontation between the Russian imperialism and the US imperialism, we will never support.
Мы категорически выступаем против империалистических интересов в Украине, что российского империализма, что западного империализма.
We will not support one form of imperialism over another. The attack of Russian imperialism threatens the existence in the future of Ukrainian people. And that's why we support the resistance. As the International Socialist League, we support the resistance of the Ukrainian people, because that's the most important part of this narrative of the right of self-determination. I really appreciate your questions, and I really appreciate the organizers, and I thank them who have invited me and have allowed me to participate in this forum. I'm really hopeful that this will be beneficial for all of us. Thank you so much for organizing this event. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you for your effort.
Comrades have asked really interesting questions. I wasn't expecting that comrades living like thousands of miles away have such a keen eye on the events happening in this part of the world, in South Asia. So I would start from the Indo-Pak tensions or this war hysteria that is everywhere in the news all over the world. This possibility of a full-blown war between the two atomic or nuclear powers. This part of world, like about 1/4 of humanity resides in South Asia, if we exclude China. But 1/4 of the humanity lives here, but 1/2 of the poverty exists in this part of the world. You can imagine the conditions in which the working masses are trying to exist in countries like Pakistan, trying to survive in countries like Pakistan and India. So you would find worst form of poverty, backwardness, and oppression, exploitation, and capitalism in its most naked forms can be observed in such regions, whether it be South Asia or Africa or other very underdeveloped parts of the world. But also because of the foreign investment and this rise of information technology and other historical factors, you would also find the most advanced forms of technology and science and infrastructure and other aspects of development. So these two very opposite aspects, when they amalgamate into one another, they give rise to this particular pattern of uneven and combined development, which was one of the basic and core theories developed by Trotsky in the context of colonial or semi-colonial or formerly colonial countries, including Russia at that time. So first of all, about the Indian and Pakistani states, we must understand that after 1947, after this bloody reactionary partition of this region into two countries on religious lines, which was basically orchestrated by the British to perpetuate and continue their policy of divide and rule, these two new states, whether it be the Indian state or Pakistani states, were not some new formations. They were basically the continuation of these old imperialist colonial states which British has established in this part of the world to loot and plunder and oppress people of South Asian subcontinent. So their character and the character of this bourgeoisie, which was basically a grafted bourgeoisie, a comprador bourgeoisie, a bourgeoisie which takes commission in the forms of their own profits in the overall imperialist plunder in these countries. So this whole character of this bourgeoisie, this belated and grafted bourgeoisie, and this colonial state has not changed much since then. So both of these countries have always used this war hysteria or this warmongering to pacify the resistance of working classes in their respective states. Whenever there is some internal crisis, whenever there is a possibility of an upsurge in the class struggle, whenever there is a possibility that people would start questioning the very existence of the state. So they try to divert this whole discontent and hatred towards the ruling classes and the state. They try to divert it towards an external enemy. So in case of Pakistan, it's India, and in case of India, it's Pakistan. So basically, the Hindu fundamentalism and the Islamic fundamentalism, they basically feed on each other. They basically complement each other. So this has been their policy from the day one, and there have been 3 full-blown wars, 1 or 2 major conflicts, including the Kargil conflicts, and then there have been relatively minor or small conflicts. and they mostly justify these wars or these conflicts through the Kashmir. Pakistan says that the Kashmir is an integral part of Pakistan. India says that Kashmir is an integral part of India, all while crushing and looting and plundering and oppressing the Kashmiri masses and denying them their right of self-determination. So there is another important aspect. If I am not taking much time, Comrade Chair can interrupt me if I'm taking much time. But the rise of Modi and BJP in India during the last few decades, particularly after the neoliberal onslaught and the dismantling of the state capitalism in India in 90s, is once again a proof that capitalism couldn't accomplish a single historical task which it has accomplished in Europe, including a relatively healthy democracy, industrialization, a secular state, an end to feudal remnants, and a secular society that is in which fundamentalism couldn't thrive. All that the rise of Modi and BJP basically represents once again the failure of capitalism in the colonial or ex-colonial countries in developing a relatively healthy and developed societies. So what Modi has been doing since 2016, he has been basically transforming the so-called democratic secular Indian state into a religious authoritarian kind of a theocratic state around his personality and his party. And it has become exceedingly difficult to overthrow BJP and Modi through electoral means alone, because the communist parties in India, because of their this stupid and the criminal two-stage ideology, they were not able to lead the working class against imperialism, against capitalism, or even against the Hindu fundamentalism. And it's a failure of this reformist left in the form of communist parties that the BJP has risen, but also the failure of the liberal bourgeoisie in All India National Congress, the Congress party, that these people have risen and they have gained mass basis. Like there are millions and millions of party workers that are organized in BJP, and they are basically trying to transform the Indian state and society on fundamentalist religious lines. So whenever there are elections or whenever there is some internal crisis or some internal discontent, these states resort to this warmongering, and both of these states are involved in supporting terrorist groups in each other's country. India has involvement in Balochistan, and Pakistan has involvement in Kashmir, but they basically try to use these movements of national emancipation for their own imperialist interests, and they basically, with this imperialist support against each other to this organization, they basically deform these movements and divert them, try to divert them on very reactionary lines. So while both of these states are nuclear powers, so while the possibility of an all-out war is minimal, next to zero, but still, if there is an all-out war, it can very quickly go out of control of these two states, but also the imperialist powers. So whenever there is some warmongering and there is some warlike situation, the imperialist powers, including China, including Saudi Arabia, including the US imperialism, including European Union, they jumps in. They basically try to de-escalate the situation, because they know that if there is a war, it can turn into a nuclear war, and it would annihilate a lot of people, and along with them, it would also destroy the whole their own imperialist interests, their very profitable investments in this part of the world, and it can escalate very quickly beyond South Asia. So they are very much familiar and aware of this threat. So they always try to de-escalate the situation. But on the other hand, these two states, while they cannot, in usual circumstances, cannot go on a full-blown war, they cannot achieve a long-lasting and durable peace. So this is this vicious cycle of warmongering and warlike situation, and sometimes some limited conflicts on the in Kashmir or some other disputed territory, and then there comes this era, this phase of negotiations and peace talks, and then once again after some time they once again fan these flames of hatred and bigotry and warmongering. So this has been going on for like 7 or 8 decades, and it is the roots of this problem are once again should be found in the crisis-ridden capitalism. These ruling classes, these states cannot give prosperity and peace and employment and bread and clothing to their people. So it is they have to then divert their attention from the actual issues through such kind of warmongering. So this is once again another such phase in which the drums of war are being beaten on both sides, and there are missiles are being tested, and these very costly, very expensive planes and arms are they are being displayed, while the people in both countries suffer from hunger and poverty and disease, and precious resources of both countries are spent on guns and planes and missiles, in which the military industrial complex of the not only West but also China earns a lot of profits. So this is the situation. Pakistan is close to China. US supports India as a counterweight to China. India tried to exert or pose itself as a regional power, which Pakistan do not admit or accept. Pakistan has its own imperialist interests in Balochistan, in Afghanistan, in Sri Lanka. India has its own imperialist influence or interest in Nepal and Bhutan, which basically act as satellite states to India. So both of these states are basically have their imperialist interests. They are not global imperialist powers, but still they have this regional influence and regional imperialist designs, in which they have basically destroyed whole of Afghanistan to crush the revolution that happened in 1978. And same is the case in India. And then there is a national question in both of these countries that has been burning for the last 8 decades. There are at least 17 or 18 separatist movements in India, and same is the case in Pakistan. Like all small or oppressed nationalities basically want independence or separation from Pakistan. So this is a mess that working masses and the oppressed people found themselves in this part of the world. And the story of Bangladesh is not quite different from India and Pakistan. So only the overthrow of capitalism and a socialist federation on a voluntary socialist federation can solve this crisis, and through this establishment of a socialist federation of South Asia, including Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Burma, Bhutan, or even Afghanistan and Iran, can the masses be emancipated from this never-ending vicious cycle of hunger and poverty and wars and civil wars and terrorism and fundamentalism. So comrades have asked another question regarding Sri Lanka. This is a very interesting situation. This guy called AKD, the Sanaike, his last name is the Sanaike. He's called AKD, the abbreviation of his full name. He belongs to JVP. The JVP is basically an ex-communist party, basically kind of an ex-Stalinist party, which was involved in armed struggle against the state a few decades ago, but then they abandoned, they gave up this armed struggle. They basically tried to go into political mainstream. But with particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union and this what you call the ideological downfall of the left all over the world, they basically watered down their Stalinist program. So what we can call them is kind of a center left, a liberal left party, which has gained some popularity during the recent recent movement in Sri Lanka, because all the existing political parties have been rejected by the masses. But we must be very clear. Their election manifesto or their party program is not even a social democratic program. It is a very, very soft left. It is basically a liberal program, and they are basically providing a left cover to this austerity measures imposed by the IMF. So sooner or later, like they would be rejected on a huge scale in Sri Lanka, and then there can be a resurgence of the movement that has halted to some extent after the recent elections. But they basically the JVP and this so-called left front, which is led by the JVP, they would basically try to dissipate the whole movement and disintegrate and dissolve it and establish the status quo. Even if they don't do it consciously, they would do it unconsciously, because the measures that they would be imposing won't be much different from the previous regimes. And ultimately, it would once again, either the people would rise up once again, or the old established parties, on the right parties or the traditional parties of the ruling class would be able to reassert themselves on the society. So there is once again this crisis of leadership in Sri Lanka, and similar is the situation in Bangladesh, although some different aspects, but still the crisis of the leadership is present in Bangladesh as well. But we must be very clear that these two movements that have erupted in the recent years were very explosive, were very powerful. People set fires to these huge buildings, whether it be the presidential palaces or the parliaments or other symbols of the power of the ruling classes. And they basically, the power was on the streets. It was not in those palaces and in those offices. The power for many weeks or many months was on the street. But there was no one to accumulate that power and direct it into a revolutionary direction in which this power could be utilized to overthrow capitalism. So this is another dilemma. So coming back to Pakistan and India, Kashmir is a burning question. The Kashmiris have been struggling for the right to self-determination for the last many decades. Particularly after the 90s, there have been an armed insurgency which was basically polluted with religious fundamentalism by the Pakistani state, and then it was diverted into a very reactionary direction. But still, their desire to be independent and their desire for the self-determination and to get rid of these oppressive Indian and Pakistani states has not died down. So we are present as JKNSF, Jammu Kashmir National Student Federation, in Kashmir. It's a relatively big student organization. It has kind of mass basis, although it has other factions as well, which are nationalist. But the faction that organizations that is associated with our organization, that is part of our organization, is being built on very strong revolutionary socialist Marxist lines, and it basically makes us different from all these national tendencies. And there has been a very vibrant, very powerful movement in Pakistani held Kashmir in the recent years, in which people have won the right to affordable electricity and affordable wheat flour, and some of their other demands were also fulfilled. So there is a very politically vibrant environment in Kashmir. There is a political debate, ideological debate everywhere in Kashmir. In the next year, there would be general elections, which would be very different from the previous elections, because the movement has transformed the whole politics and society and culture in Kashmir. And we are trying to make sure that we contest these elections on this new front, which we are forming, called PRF, People's Revolutionary Front, and we contest these elections on a revolutionary socialist program and try to utilize this whole electoral activity in building the international organization, and building the national organization, and building a Marxist organization, not only in Pakistani held Kashmir but also in the Indian held Kashmir. So this is, I believe, I have touched or sufficiently answered all the questions, because all these questions have very long historical background behind them, and we can discuss about these issues in more detail at some other time. But comrades, I would try to finish with this. Just look at what Trump is doing. He has basically transformed turned this White House and American presidency and this office of the president into a circus. He's basically not, his habits, his acts are no different than a clown. Every day there is some new gimmick, there is some new impulse, there is some new explosion, there is something that was unthinkable even a few years ago. What he is doing was unthinkable even during his previous presidency. So it reflects something. If clowns such as him, or even Millet, and there are many other examples like him, if they are coming to power, so it means it reflects very deep socio-political and cultural crisis of capitalism. And it also reflects the discontent that is seething within all these societies throughout the world. People want change. People want an alternate. And when the left is unable to present an alternate to this misery, to this exploitation, to this austerity, inevitably it would be the right that would be filling that void, because there cannot be a void for a very long time in politics. Some power, either from the left or from the right, has to fill it. So it's a very deep crisis. Like such non-serious people, as I have said earlier, like the bourgeois representatives were trained and propped up, and they were like educated for decades before bringing them to power. And like they used to behave like very, very honest and very cultured statesmen, as we have many examples all over the world. But this whole liberal method and order and this whole liberal politics is basically disintegrating, and clowns like Millet and Trump this guy from Elon Musk, this guy called Elon Musk, they are coming into power, and they are trying to transform the whole states. Capitalism in its decay, in its crisis-ridden form, which we find it today, is unable to afford any civil or democratic liberties. So they are basically trying to take all those liberties, all those democratic rights from the working class one by one, because in order to raise their rate of profits, or at least in order to stop downfall in the rate of decline in the rate of profits, they need more exploitation. They need more oppression, and this is what the right, this far right, is doing all over the world. This is the ideological and political expression of this economic crisis. This is a need, ultimate and inevitable need of capitalism, that it cannot be run with the old methods, and they can do horrible things in the days to come. When Hitler came to power in 1933, no one could imagine what he would be doing in a few years. Similarly, many people were not believing that what Trump was saying in his election campaign, that he would do it actually. But the point is, he is doing all those things actually, and going even further than that. So this whole process can escalate very, very quickly. We must be prepared for extraordinary events, for extraordinary happenings, for extraordinary turns in history in the days to come. And we must, as Trotsky has said, that the basic task of a revolutionary is to identify the character of an epoch, an era of a history, and find his or her place in that particular epoch, in that particular historical process. So that's what we have to do. There is no guarantee that after a post-capitalist society would be a socialist society. This would be a very vulgar interpretation of historical materialism. The whole society can decay into barbarism, into chaos, into war, the horrors of which we cannot even imagine today. So the only guarantee that we overthrow capitalism and march towards a socialist future, towards a communist future, that is without any misery and oppression and exploitation, the only guarantee to that emancipation is that we build a revolutionary international, we build revolutionary parties all over the world, we organize the working masses, we like getting rid of all those previous sectarian attitudes, we come together, we come close to the tendencies that have a common program with us, not on unprincipled or not on unprincipled basis or in a hurry, but on principled basis, with a debate, with a discussion, and carry forward this socialist flag and guide the working masses and the whole of the humanity towards the socialist emancipation. Thank you.